I'm going to move the, and also I found an extra set. Can I use these? I won't write them. Yep. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'd like to start off first where we started jury selection, and that is I want to remind everyone that Mr. Dumercy is presumed innocent. He's pled not guilty in this case, and unless the state has proven to you after you deliberate beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty, you must find him not guilty. I want to refocus you first on the law in this case, because at first blush, I mean, if you look at the video, he obviously killed Mr. Peoples. It looks as if in cold blood, if you look at it in a vacuum. But we know there's more to this case than what's on that video and what's behind it. And I think I'll put this in perspective initially. I want to discuss with you the stand your ground law, because like it or not, I'm going to go through this with you and break it down. Collectively, the citizens voted a legislature and that passed this law. And as crazy as it may seem, this is the law in the state of Florida that I'm going to go through with you now. Because how the state, in a closing argument, obviously each side is up here to advocate on their client. For the state, it's the government. For me, it's Mr. Delinord Dumercy. But the way the state has spun this is actually disregards completely the stand your ground law and why Dumercy is entitled to, in effect, present that to the jury and ask you to find him not guilty. And I want to start off with, do you have copies of your jury?
Copies of?
The jury instructions? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. If you could turn to justifiable use of deadly force. It's 3.6F. It should be. Okay, so just as an example on why it's important to stick to the facts and not emotion is under justifiable use of deadly force and the stand your ground, the premise of the stand your ground law is that you're not required, and obviously I'll get to why he's entitled to put forth stand your ground, but you're not required to retreat. So, actually, I meant to do that next. Yeah, this is like the premise of the stand your ground law. If you are lawful, if you're acting lawfully under Florida stand your ground law, you're not required to retreat. So, whether or not you shot someone one time or 10 times. And they're saying, well, he emptied his gun, he shot him again. Well, which I'll get to in a moment, but he was acting lawfully and was not required to retreat. And whether or not he shot Mr. Peoples once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, it was really not an issue. If you find, and we're asking you to do that this was justifiable homicide based on Florida stand your ground law. So I do want to refocus you on that, because when you first look at that video, it is insane. I mean, you actually see a person shooting someone not once, twice. And then he follows him again. He's not required to retreat. And I want to break down for you why. Okay, the other premise is if the danger need not have been actual, okay, and that is because, which I'm going to get to next, is because they've built into this law the fact that you may, unfortunately, be faced with what you believe to be the necessity of using deadly force based on past issues you have had with the person you're now defending yourself against. In this case, the state, no, I get it. They're saying, well, all he had on him was a cell phone or, wallet. But under this law, it doesn't matter because Dumercy, again, it does not have to be, the danger need not have been actual. Okay, it's what he reasonably believed based on, and here is the premise of the standing ground law. Okay, first, if you find Dumercy, who because of threats or prior difficulties with peoples had reasonable grounds to believe he was in danger of death or great bodily harm at the hands of Mr. Peoples, you may consider this fact in determining whether the actions of Dumercy were those of a reasonable person. So first we have threats. Okay, so let's start with this. Okay, first we have threats and prior difficulties. Okay, so let's think about threats. Well, first of all, he was shot at. Okay, he was threatened by phone. Okay, we know that, and he tied in the fact that he does admit that initially he believed it was Peoples because who else would have been shooting at him, but Mr. Peoples called him while he was at work and said, wherever you live, work, I'm going to kill you. He made threats to him by phone and obviously had prior difficulties with him. Okay, so that's the first thing that it's the law. You have to take that into account. The second is that if you find at the time of the alleged first-degree murder with a firearm, Dumercy knew Peoples had committed an act of violence, you may consider that fact in determining whether Dumercy reasonably believed it was necessary for him to use deadly force. So, and this deals with specific act of violence. Dumercy told you that he had learned that when he testified, he had learned that Mr. Peoples had broken into a home and injured someone. This was a specific act of violence that he knew of, and the law says that you are to take that into account in determining whether Dumercy acted reasonably. Okay, if you find that Peoples had a reputation of being violent and a dangerous person, and that his reputation was known to Dumercy, you may consider that fact as well in determining whether or not Dumercy acted as a reasonable person in dealing with an individual of that reputation. So clearly Dumercy knew. Okay, there was some type of gang affiliation, which was the 9th Street, or 9th Avenue. He had a reputation for violence. He had a reputation for carrying a gun. And so all of these also, the law instructs you, are to be taken into account deciding whether or not Mr. Dumercy acted reasonably under the circumstances. Okay, so this is this is the initial foundation upon which, I'm going to go through the facts with you now, upon which you're to decide whether or not Mr. Dumercy should be found not guilty in this case. He clearly, and I'm going to fit the facts in a second into the standing ground law, but clearly he had prior threats and difficulties with him. He was shot at. He was threatened by phone. They did have prior difficulties. He was aware of specific acts of violence on the part of Mr. Peoples, and he was aware of Mr. Peoples' reputation for violence at the time that he unfortunately made the decision to defend himself, which ended in Mr. Peoples' death. So with that said, I want to go through now the facts of this case and why the state has not proven the case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. I want to start with the testimony of Ms. Darnisha McRae. And I'm going to go through a list of issues that I would request you consider when you go back and deliberate on this case and decide on what credibility or how much credibility, if any, you should give Ms. McRae as a witness. Now, first of all, she clearly, I'm using this in a broad sense, but clearly she deleted, from our perspective, the most significant text in this case, and that is the text where she said, "James wants to kill you." Okay, now how do we know it was deleted? Okay, we don't have a dump of her phone because detectives never bothered to send it out, to an outside agency or company, when they couldn't do it themselves. But Detective Land, had the physical phone and was able to go through that phone and saw that this text about James wanting to kill you was not within that phone. So even he admits on the stand, on cross-examination, that text is missing. And she specifically, and by the way, the state asked her, they said, because obviously they know this is a problem, but they asked her, well, what did the detective tell you? Why didn't you include that text when you gave the snap, which this is great, but the detectives basically had her do their work, which I'm going to get to later. But in a murder case, they asked an on-scene witness to do their work. So she brings these snapshots from her phone. She claims the detective said, here's the excuse now, well, only bring threats. Okay, when the detective took the stand, if you remember, he was asked by the state, well, what did you tell her? He did not say. He instructed her to only bring threatening, or what she perceived to be threatening text messages. He said he instructed her to take screenshots of the text. So she purposely left that out. She definitely left that text out. It was destroyed by her. The detective never, and again, not that you wouldn't get the same trial if you were charged with petty theft, but this is murder. The detective never sat her down and said, did you destroy this text? Are there other texts that you took out of your phone that I don't have? He never sat her down. He never even asked her, well, he clearly saw the text and said, and this is after talking to Dumercy, knowing that Dumercy was saying he acted in self-defense. He never asked her, why did you not give me this text where it says that James wants to kill him? So clearly, but she purposely did not give them that text. And what about the night of this incident? She knows that obviously these two guys are having issues. It's almost, you get the feeling if you step back, she's like playing them against each other. If you think about it, it's crazy. So she knows they're having issues. What does she do? But she's with James. They see Dumercy as he pulled up on the bike next to the vehicle, which he did not realize that she was in the car with him. He took off immediately. Now think about this. What does she do? But they followed Dumercy in the car. He Peoples, and we know this because her brother testified that Peoples is the one that's told her to stop the car. She stops the vehicle. I think the state even admitted in opening that, he threw up his hands or something, when he got out of the vehicle, as if, like to tell Dumercy, I'm here. But it's more than this. She circles around, picks him back up, and goes to the gas station. Okay, I'm not going to, you have the tape, but she circles around, she drops him off at the pump, and then she circles around. Dumercy's right, it almost does look like a setup. She knew where his bike was. She parks by the bicycle. She starts almost pulling around as he's walking forward towards the gas station. Why would he do that? What's the point? Why would Mr. Peoples and her drive around, follow him on his bike? There was no reason to. What are they going to have? What's the point? Why would she circle around, drop him off? He walks towards the gas station. Think about this. Now, Dumercy has in the back of his mind, he shot at me, he threatened me, he told me, no matter where you work, live, I will find and kill you. Why is she dropping him off to walk into the gas station? Now, again, he wasn't armed, but you have to take into account what Dumercy knew. He's a gang member. He had broken into a house prior. He knew about that and injured someone. He was known to carry a gun. He had a reputation for violence. So when the state says he killed him in cold blood, no, he didn't kill him in cold blood. But Dumercy actually tried to escape. And as you've seen on the video ad nauseum, he literally went to the back door. And Mr. Colvin, I believe was his name, the person that Dumercy bumps into as he's walking out. Mr. Colvin said, beyond a doubt, that door was locked. It's interesting, when Dumercy fires the first shot, everyone runs to that door to try and get out. They can't because it's locked. And had Dumercy gotten out that back door, we would not be here today. And Mr. Peoples would be alive. And Dumercy wouldn't be facing a murder charge. But he definitely tried to escape. For the state to say that he killed him in cold blood, no, he did not. He shot him in self-defense, lawfully, under Florida Standing Ground Law. He knew of his violent reputation. He knew him to carry a firearm. He had been threatened by him in the past. Mr. Peoples had shot at him. And here they are, following him in a vehicle to a gas station. Why? Well, I don't know. Maybe it was to talk it out and shake his hand, but too bad. Dumercy is not required to think that. Under Florida Standing Ground Law, with the knowledge he had of Mr. Peoples, he's actually lawfully entitled to consider the worst. He had to think the worst. That this man is coming to kill me. And that's exactly what he thought. And no, he didn't just wait for him, didn't jump out of the door. He literally tried to escape out the back door, and it was locked. Now think about this. Mr. Saroyan, hours before this, Hervis Saroyan, he's at Nipper's Bar in Boca with Mr. Peoples. What's Mr. Peoples saying? Can you get me a gun? And Saroyan, this isn't like a stray. He knew him for he said he was an associate of his. He knew him for 6 years. Now, this does not mean that Mr. Peoples was armed. Don't get me wrong, because again, it doesn't matter under the Florida Standing Ground Law if he was actually armed. But it's relevant that he asked him for a gun. He said he was about to spaz out. Obviously, it doesn't take brain surgery to know who he was talking about. He said he was talking about the guy that was the boyfriend or ex-boyfriend. I forgot the term he used. You defer to what you remember. That he was having sex with a pregnant girl. He's obviously talking about Dumercy. And that's hours before Nippers. And Now, here's another thing to take into account. But DeAndre McCrae told law enforcement now, this is the night of the incident. Shooting's just taken place. DeAndre McCrae's in the vehicle. He's questioned by law enforcement. They ask him specifically, how was James when he exited the vehicle? You know, when he got out of the car. What does he tell? And these are under oath statements. So he tells them, not only was he mad, he was furious when he exited that car. And again, not to show that he was armed, but it is a fact that you're allowed to take into account. He said he was furious and mad when he exited that vehicle. So clearly there was something going on. You know, a specific reason why. In fairness to Delinord Dumercy, why he had a right to believe what he did. Mad and furious when he exited the vehicle, when they, not Dumercy, when they followed him to the gas station and he got out of the car. And in court, both Miss McCrae, his sister, and he are now saying he was fine. No issues when he exited the vehicle. Clearly, just like she deleted the text message, just like she never told law enforcement or produced it to them when they told her to take snapshots, clearly she's downplaying what was going on with Mr. Peoples at the time of this incident. And now, just flip this. And I want to discuss with you Ms. Tassie, Mr. Dumercy's mom. So she is at her house. She had just come home from work. Black male with dreads arrives at the home, knocks on the door. Someone else is in a vehicle that's driving or that is driven to the house. And they're looking for, not they, but this black male with dreads is looking for Dumercy. She testifies she gets angry when she's saying he doesn't live here anymore. Can't give him any additional information. And after the shooting, her other child, she had a 12-year-old son at the time, pulls up a picture of Mr. Peoples, and she realized that this is the person that actually came to the home. And remember, she called Mr. Dumercy and said, she thought it was a friend at the time, or someone who was acquainted with, said, I don't want these people, don't allow this person to come by the house. I mean, clearly that was Mr. Peoples searching for Mr. Dumercy. What about the shooting in the park? Now, think about this. He didn't William Nevis say that he remembered Dumercy telling him at night, apparently, but we're not going to tell him what to say. And that's what he's saying, that Dumercy told him it occurred at night. The fact is, not whether day or night, the important thing is that prior to walking into the police, he told someone that he'd been shot at by the park, and he later learns it's clearly Mr. Peoples because Peoples called him on the phone. What's amazing is Dumercy walks into first of all, he self-surrendered in this case. He did not talk to an attorney. He goes in the next morning, they Mirandize him. He agrees to speak with law enforcement. He immediately told them, I don't know if you have the transcript, or do you have the transcripts? I wasn't sure if they take it back from you. But anyways, if you have the transcripts, you don't have to necessarily look now. But he immediately told them that I'm summarizing here, but he's acting self-defense. He told them about being shot at, about the threats. I mean, he walked in and told them he was acting self-defense. And the amazing thing is he gives them the information about being shot in Pompey Park. I guess better late than never, but 3 years late. And he tells them, by the way, that he did not call the police. So it's no miracle that they didn't find anything in the readout. But 3 years later, I guess the state's trying to say, well, they did an investigation. What? I could do it. They pulled a CAD report 3 years later to show that there was no phone call from Dumercy. So what? Hey, what about saying, I'll look into people's background. We'll send a detective. There's got to be someone that's available to the park or a crime scene person with a metal detector, see if there's any shell casings on the ground. Oh, what about checking video? I don't know, whatever the videos on homes nowadays, videos on the, the street, right? The street pole videos. What about canvassing the neighborhood? I mean, it's a murder case. I mean, maybe he did act in self-defense. Clearly, the officers from the beginning. And maybe it was because they saw the video, because it is hard to conceive of self-defense if you look at the video in a vacuum. But clearly, they completely dispelled the issue of self-defense from the moment they sat down with Dumercy. They did no investigation in this case. I mean, it's mind-boggling. At least send someone out to the park. How about doing that? Canvass the neighborhood. See if someone did hear shots. Check for bullets. Check for video to see if people's car, the one that he's known to drive, maybe even visible, was in the area at the time. Didn't even do that. How about this? There's got to be some budget, it's Delray. Go to an outside agency and see if you can dump her phone. I mean, the text is missing already. What about doing that? They didn't do that. But what about this? We know that she texted with Mr. Peoples on an iPad. Did she ever go and bring the iPad? The detectives even asked to see any multimedia material between herself and Mr. Peoples to see if this was, in fact, self-defense. Yeah, they didn't do anything. And finally, we have, and by the way, Nevis confirms that Dumercy lived with him, and Pastor Jackson, who testified by phone, testified that Dumercy was living with him, I think 3 or 4 days before the shooting and the day of the shooting. He testified that he didn't leave the house a lot of the time, which he acted somewhat, I'm paraphrasing here, but he didn't act normally. He said he tied that in after the shooting. And Dumercy himself was so afraid of people. Think about this. But unlike some people, he was working 2 jobs. He was working at the deli. He was working at the Shula Burger. He was hoping to be a manager someday. But he quit those jobs over fear that peoples would find him. He became homeless for a few days until in between Mr. Neves and living in Pastor Jackson's home. But he obviously wasn't living at the mom's house at the time because he was not there when Mr. Peoples came looking for him. But he completely enveloped himself in, I'm going to use the term protection, including buying the gun. And he bought the gun specifically because he feared that Mr. Peoples would kill him. And let me turn back now to the self-defense instruction. So if in your consideration of the issue of self-defense you have a reasonable doubt on the question of whether Dumercy was justified in the use of deadly force, you should find him not guilty. Okay, so let me summarize for you of what happened here. And by the way, I do want to touch on the text messages because the text messages, from our perspective, are, and obviously the state feels differently, but they're not proof of premeditation, but they are mean-spirited, obviously. But like Dumercy said, he never threatened Darnisha McCrae. And that's an interpretation you'll have to decide. But if you do look at the text, he never threatened her. In fact, even after some of the bad texts, She goes right back saying, well, I'm at the doctor, I need money. But it's almost like she's brushing it off. So the text messages are what they are. But the bottom line is this. The Peoples threatened him. He shot at him. He was clearly searching for him. We know he came to the mom's house. He threatened him by phone. Couple hours, 2-3 hours before the incident at the gas station, he was looking for a gun, telling Sharoyan that he was about to spaz out on, which it's clear he was talking about Dumercy. But he directed Miss McRae, when he saw Delinord, because they could have just pulled off, he directed her to pull around and stop. He got back in the car. He directed her to go to the gas station where he exited the vehicle. She pulls around towards the front. He walks towards that gas station with Mr. Dumercy, knowing his reputation for violence, specific acts of violence, prior threats, having been shot at. Mr. Dumercy attempted to escape through the back door, could not, and stood his ground. He's not required to retreat under Florida law, as insane as it may seem to you. I don't know how familiar you are with that law, but he's not required to retreat. And whether he shot him once, twice, or 10 times is immaterial. Once, he believed that he could stand his ground if he acted reasonably. And of course he did, when you take into account what's behind the video in this case. Because again, if you just look at the video, that's horrible. But if you look behind what went into Mr. Dumercy actually making that decision, then unfortunately it's not. It's horrible that Mr. Peoples died, but Mr. Dumercy is on trial for first-degree murder. That's premeditated murder. He told the police he was acting in self-defense. They did nothing to look into that, and now it's up to you. So we're asking you to, again, presume he's innocent. When you go back and deliberate, look at the whole picture, not just the video at the scene. Although it is important for you to see that he literally tried to escape to get out that back door. So it's not like he just waited in hiding for Mr. Peoples to pull the gun. He literally went to that back door and it was locked, and that's why, unfortunately, we are here. But if you take into account what he knew of Mr. Peoples, the threats, how Mr. Peoples behaved, the fact that, and Darnisha McRae clearly knew something was up. She destroyed a text and didn't turn over to law enforcement, really a key text that said, James wants to kill you. She pulled around. She let him out of the vehicle. There was no reason to follow him. He had been to his home looking for him. We know through the mom's testimony. But if you take everything into account, Mr. Dumercy is not guilty. And this is not to downplay that someone died. But he is charged with premeditated murder, and he's entitled to defend himself. And I don't say that as a pun. I'm saying that for real. So this is extremely serious. I'm asking you to put all your efforts into deliberating this case. And we're asking that you find Mr. Dumercy not guilty. He did not commit premeditated murder in this case. He told law enforcement that right off the bat. The evidence bears that out. He knew of reputation, threats, physical violence. They followed him. He tried to escape, and he stood his ground. And because of that, we are asking that you find him not guilty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fleischman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take about a 10 or 15-minute recess for you all. I'm going to have my deputy hand you menus to order your lunches with, and then we'll bring you back out and you can hear the state's rebuttal closing argument, and then I'll give you just a short set of instructions before you go back to deliberate. So while you're on your recess right now, as I told you, my deputy's got the menus in his hand. Just check off everything that you want, and do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not use your cell phones to call anybody and discuss this case. Don't look up anything on your cell phones or any electronic devices. I don't think anybody has any, but I always feel like saying that to try to do any research about the case. And I'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
You bring your pens back.